The shifting landscapes of America, to me, it's the mythic West, so it isn't touched backwards to the work of people like John Ford. The image of Travis leaving at the end, going back to wandering again, having delivered his own son back to his son's mother, is kind of in some way related to John Wayne leaving at the end of The Searchers. The immensity of America, the sense that people can get lost in that world. Those are words from director Sam Mendes on Wim Wenders' 1984 film, Paris, Texas. Seeing Faces in Movies is a podcast where each month I focus on the works of a different director or cinematographer, and each week I invite a guest on to discuss the film and the artist's filmography. Today we're talking about Paris, Texas, and a quick synopsis of the film is Travis Henderson, an aimless drifter who has been missing for 4 years, wanders out of the desert and must reconnect with society, himself, his life, and his family. The tagline for the film is a place for dreams, a place for heartbreak, a place to pick up the pieces. The film stars Harry Dean Stanton as Travis Henderson, Dean Stockwell as Walt Henderson, Ahal Clement as Anne Henderson, Hunter Curson as Hunter Henderson, and Nastasia Kinski as Jane Henderson. It's written by Sam Shepard, adapted from a story by L.M. Kit Carson, cinematography by Robby Müller, edited by Peter Prescott, and music by Ry Cooder. So today my guest is Brendan Ross, who is the curator for a series called Neon Dreams. I first met you, I guess, from just going to the screenings and whatnot. And I'm just going to nerd out here for a little bit and just give a little backstory about my relationship to the series. So back, this must be, I think it's actually exactly 2015. A good friend, Peter, he and I worked together and we'd always go see movies together at the Royal because we worked down near Trinity Bellwoods. So it was just like a walk up for us. And he's like, do you want to go see this movie that's on at the Royal tonight? I was like, fine. Didn't look to see what it was. Get there. It happens to be Miracle Mile. Had never heard of this movie before. And I went in just totally blind, left. Life changed. Like I was obsessed with it. My friend didn't love it that much. Admittedly, it's not really his vibe, but he went to other ones. But then after that, I went to every single Neon Dreams screening, even ones that where I was kind of like, I don't know, like 8 Million Ways to Die, which I was kind of like, I don't know if this is going to be my vibe because I'm not a huge Jeff Bridges person, but I went to go see it, loved it. Hal Ashby, loved that. You know, then I moved away to Ireland and missed like about a year and now I have a kid, so I can't come as often, but I try and go whenever I can because sometimes it'll be movies that I already know and love and want to go see. And sometimes it's stuff I've never heard of before. So, you know, I'll let you introduce yourself, but you know, I'm a huge fan of Neon Dreams. So I'd love for you to tell the listeners a little bit about Neon Dreams, yourself, and what your relationship is to cinema and specifically, you know, the films of Robby Müller.
Cool. Well, thank you, Felicia. That's so nice. I'm so glad that Miracle Man was your first screening because that was a like massive one for me. That was like that was the first time I've ever done a Q&A. Like we actually flew in the director Steve Jarnatt to come in from LA. And again, for someone who's never actually like done a Q&A before, it was exhilarating and terrifying and exciting and all of the emotions at once. That was a very memorable screening. So I'm glad that was the one that you made it to first. Yeah, a bit about Neon Dreams. I've been doing it since 2015. That was like one of the first screenings. Originally, I was very focused on like kind of neo-noir crime thrillers, typically just movies where people get shot under neon lights while synth pop plays in the background. That was kind of it. At the time, I thought I would be doing it for like, you know, maybe like a couple of months before somebody would be like, that's enough. But I managed to build an audience and they let me keep doing it. So I kind of had to like broaden my scope a little bit. And now I'm more focused. It's not exclusively a crime series anymore. And it's more focused on kind of vibe and like the mood that it sets. And yeah, it's always been a thing that I've had a difficult time explaining what these movies are, because I've definitely had these conversations. People are like, oh, like just kind of campy old like so good they're bad movies, and I'm like, no, and fuck you. Not that at all. But yeah, I think for the most part the people that do keep coming, they really kind of got what it was, and like they understand that like there is a lot of these movies are very over the top and kind of audacious, but in a way that they're just like pure craft and like the kind of films that everybody involved in them really cares. Like I would never want to intentionally show like a bad movie. Yeah, that's a bit about it. And then it's I've kept going with it. I've switched switched over after the whole pandemic happened. I switched to like an online version for a while where we just kind of did like digital screenings and had like a live chat going on, and we'd like raise money for different charities. That was a lot of fun because we don't have to worry about like booking fees, and we can just play whatever we want. We don't have to worry about like enough people buying tickets. It's just like, I'm going to play this weird movie. And that was a great way to like get through that hellish time. And then after the world opened up again, I moved over to the review cinema, and it's been great.
Yeah, it's like you said, I wasn't sure what year it had started. So it's cool that I've been going that long, and also realizing how young I would have been at that time versus now. So it feels like a whole different era. But I have also seen like the evolution of the different films that you've shown, and, you know, the people I'll never forget. And I know this is not a podcast about not neon dreams, but just it's my excuse to talk about movies I love. I'll never forget certain screenings like when you did Out of the Blue, and a few of us went and we just randomly met up with some people who were at the screening at the bar next door, and we were talking about it, but we're all just kind of like silently sitting there for a bit because we were like, I'm traumatized.
Yeah. And I try, like, for the longest time, it was like, oh, this is just nothing but good vibes. But then, yeah, lately I've been like, I don't know. There's room for bad vibe screenings too.
Yep.
As long as they're vibes, you know? Yeah, that is a try. I feel like every time I see a school bus now, I just like stop at my tracks. Like, I can't handle it anymore. Yeah, it's really it's ruined school buses for me.
What a movie. Yeah. What a movie. But I'd love to hear a little bit more about your relationship to the films of Robby Müller. You know, how did you get into his stuff? When did you start noticing him as a cinematographer?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I should preface by saying that like I don't have like an academic background in terms of cinematography or just an academic approach in general to it. The easiest way to put it is I like neon lights and I like colors, and I just like those. Like, it's also not just like the lighting, although he is kind of like the master of light. That's sort of his thing. But there is also just this kind of deliberately paced approach that he takes to shooting. He uses a lot of wide angles, and just there's a lot of space in his frames, and he just really captures something that it kind of seems dreamy and sort of otherworldly, but also just there's something so natural about it. And those films, like, even before I got into knowing like who cinematographers even were and like being able to differentiate like this movie was shot by this person, this movie was shot, I think I just always kind of know. Like, I would watch Repo Man and I would watch Paris, Texas, and be like, there's something like these are two wildly different movies, and like, you know, the pacing and the editing and the way they're performed is wildly different, but they have this kind of similar, not even look, but just like feel, like there's like a language to them. And I think that really drew me to him. And once I finally realized that, like, oh, this guy, who also did like Lars von Trier movies and like, you know, the best Jim Jarmusch movies and stuff. And I was just like, my God, and I just went on this like tear, and I wanted to see. It was the first time that I was more interested in like a cinematographer than I was a director. And yeah, I just kind of fell in love with like the world that he was able to create with his camera. I guess that's the easiest and vaguest way that I could put it.
No, I identify with all of that. I think not that, you know, I did go to film school, but I studied, you know, film history, and maybe it's different now, but cinematography or the way things were shot were always kind of attributed to the director when I was in school, which sounds like it's ages ago, and it probably is kind of ages ago, but I assume now things are different. It wasn't until seeing the films that he worked on that I actually like realized it's him doing this, you know, because something like a Paris, Texas or Repo Man are like my all-time favorite films. And then I love the Jarmusch stuff. I love the Von Trier stuff, and just being like, oh, I recognize that name. Okay, so I see what he's doing here. So I think that's a good segue to getting into one of the first points I wanted to talk about, because you're talking about like vibes. He is a cinematographer that has his own quirks that you kind of see, but he does adapt to the story. It's not like he has a specific vision where he's like, this is how I shoot. Everything needs to come around that. He will adapt, but he has like, you know, the lighting, the neon that you see, but he basically kind of just works on vibes. And I say that because I've been doing research on him, and the way he talks about the way he shoots, he just says it's through feelings. He's like, he rarely discusses technical stuff prior to it. He doesn't really care about the camera he's using or the lenses. He just wants to get out there, hold the camera himself. He doesn't use an operator, and just feel the scene, the location, where he is, as opposed to being like, I need this specific camera, and he's using the natural lighting. So for you, when you're watching his films, do you feel that he's kind of just taking in his environment and utilizing that?
Yeah, 100%. Like, I definitely get the feeling, like, some of the stuff, I mean, we're focusing on Paris, Texas. I think some of that stuff, you really get the feeling that you just kind of like made it up on the spot, like they arrived on a location. And I guess, like, to use an example, one shot that really comes to mind is, do you remember, like, at the end when Travis and his son are coming back from the bar after they first saw I'm forgetting Natasha Kinski's character name.
Jane.
Jane, thank you. After they first saw Jane, then he took Kiss into the bar, and him and Hunter are leaving the bar and walking across the street to the hotel. And it's just this dark, dusty road where there's just newspapers blowing all around. You can't like plan that. Like, I know that I'm sure they put newspapers down to like make them blow around, but just the way that like the wind kind of caught that and the way that the sun was setting on it, I feel like they just kind of arrived and they were like, oh, this is something. Let's see what we can do. Like, that's kind of the impression that I get. I think with like all of his work, but with this one especially, it really does feel like it was just like this like lightning in a bottle. They just kind of were like, let's kind of run with it and see what we can capture. Yeah, that's how I feel about it.
I think it's that, especially when you're talking about Paris, Texas, and the work that he did with Wenders. They talk about how they're both not American and they're being put into this Texas landscape, which is different than even you and I are familiar with because we live in Canada. We don't really have that desert landscape, at least in Ontario. And for them to navigate not romanticizing it. And when I was reading them say that, I thought that was really interesting because I think when the film opens up on the desert landscapes there behind Travis and you see how vast and beautiful it is, you kind of just romanticize it yourself. At least I do, where I'm like, oh, this is so beautiful. It'd be nice to live there. And I'm sure it probably isn't, totally. The best. So for them, they were like, we are provided with something so visually beautiful. How do we not make it better than it actually is? How do we just present it in its realness? So when it comes to like the landscapes in this, because that's kind of what this film is known for, how do you feel about the way the landscapes are shot? Because sometimes for other people, if someone else were to take this, it could overpower the story.
Yeah, well, that's a really good point actually about how, like, obviously, like they are foreigners and they are kind of, they're not native to this land. And you do definitely have there's a distinct difference. Like, I've seen movies shot in Texas made by Texans, and this doesn't look like that at all. And there is kind of this like outsider looking in perspective that does give it like a different feel, where again, exactly what like you said, it's like, it's almost like looking at it as if you're on vacation. You're like, oh, like this place is beautiful. I have like a week in this place. I'm going to just like milk it for all its beauty. Whereas somebody who might like live in that exact same town, they would probably look at it like a completely different way. Yeah, it might be a little bit less romantic and just like the way that they shot. So you really feel that they're just like kind of stunned by like, this is completely different than like where we're from. And we're just completely captivated by like this weird, bizarre, kind of desolate beauty that this place has. Nothing about it is particularly pretty. Like, the locations aren't pretty at all. Like, a lot of them look very sad, and like ultimately it's a sad movie about sad people. Navigating us like very sad lives full of regrets, but they managed to kind of strike these like beautiful images of sad places in a way that like I don't think I've ever seen before.
It looks beautiful, but it's also, there's a lot of ugliness. Even like the shot where Travis is sitting on the broken down like yellow truck, I could shoot that and it would look absolutely hideous, right? Because it's not, the most beautiful sight.
Certainly if it was a tractor in Toronto.
I mean, geez. What I love is just their respect for their environment and treating it with love, but not making it something it's not. Because as you said, this is a very sad story. And also just not being like, oh, this is a sad story. It needs to look super grim and dark all the time. The dark scenes that we have in this film are gorgeous with the lights, the neon. There is a quote I do want to read quickly from Müller on just the framing in his shots. So he says, showing off is what Müller equates with singling out portions of the image in a way that is inconsistent with the story. He says, what I try to avoid is pointing at something so that I become patronizing to the people who look at the image. I'd rather give the audience the chance to discover it themselves. For me, that's a very important thing, that you still have things to discover for yourself. So what I like about that is, I'm sure you've also seen this movie several times. Every time I do see it, I notice something else or something different in the frames. that is something that's beautiful and gorgeous, and even something that could be really important to the story, but wasn't called to attention right away. I think it's interesting the way he does that, where, as you said, like he's shooting in wider frames. There's no real zooms on things to be like, you should pay attention to this because this is important later. It's more so you figure it out. You'll see it, whether you see it in this viewing or other viewings, you'll see it. So how do you feel about, and it's a large question because there's so many beautiful shots and frames in this film, but the framing and just letting people discover things on their own.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the strongest things about the film is that there's never any moment where you feel like you're kind of forced into any emotions. Obviously, there's a lot of films where it's like, this is the part where you're sad, and this is the comic relief part, and this is the part where the music's going to swell, and it's going to force you into like having these emotions, whether you like it or not. Like, it's all just kind of this machine, and I don't feel like that with this film at all. It never really guides you. And I mean, and this is more, I guess, about like the plotting of the film, but I love how this film starts so small and there's absolutely no context given into like how we got here, who these people are, and then over time it just kind of expands and it just gets bigger and bigger. You eventually start to know these people, not from any like expositional dialogue or anything, but just from like, oh, you get to like live with these people for a couple of hours and you get to like watch their faces and see how they interact with each other. And as the story kind of goes along, new characters introduced and you see how they interact with those characters, you really get a sense of who these people are. And I think there's not enough of that, you know? I feel like so many films, not even just nowadays, but even at the time, like in 1984, like I think this was a rarity at that time too, when you were kind of being force fed, like this is how you're supposed to react to the plot. I think it's absolutely beautiful how it lets you kind of choose your own adventure, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, and that's something that he says himself. He's like, and whether I even agree with this or not, because this is his way of viewing, he's like, for me, I'm just shooting things. I'm trying to capture the story, but I'm not guiding the story. I don't know. Sometimes I feel like because his work is so beautiful, I think that he's also creating a story. But I do see what he's saying. As he said, like you're never kind of pushed into feeling a certain way. And sometimes the camera can do that. Sometimes music can do that. Words. I noticed that for this one because for me, I have always gotten super emotional watching this movie, and I love the story that I'm watching. And most people do feel the same way, but I've talked to like good friends who are like, I don't know how I'm supposed to feel after this. You know, they seem like kind of shitty parents. Am I supposed to be rooting for them? And I was like, right. That's valid.
Yeah.
I was so wrapped up in everything else that I wasn't thinking about that.
Yeah. Well, I actually want to pause on that. Like your friend asking you, like, how am I supposed to feel? Like, that's such a, I don't know, that's to me, that's kind of like a great question. It's like, well, how do you feel? you know, like you're not really supposed to feel any one way or another. And like, you know, maybe like I'll feel one way and you'll feel a completely different way. And like, I don't know, that's kind of a beautiful thing.
I do want to talk about, I mean, lighting is obviously a huge thing. For me, I love the daytime scenes. What I always associate him with is kind of nighttime, or what I love about him the most is his nighttime shooting and the lighting there. And I know there's one really kind of famous shot where Travis and Walter inside the diner and they have the car lights on the outside lighting them in. And I just loved that shot. Bueller just being like, why don't we just turn on the car light?
Yeah.
And see. So it's stuff like that where it's just kind of utilizing the environment around them. So for you, are there any other shots that really stick out and why? Because there's so much to pick from, but there's always going to be like a few shots that always stick in your brain.
Yeah, totally. I mean, you know, the whole movie does feel very Edward Hopper-esque, I guess, just the way that it kind of has this, you know, it uses shadows and uses light to kind of like tell a story of America almost. But I mean, the one that you mentioned, that is brilliant because and I love seeing that. And I love talking about that stuff because I feel like, you know, you can listen to like some of the like, you know, hotshot cinematographers and they can, you know, have like a 16-page essay on like how they got like one single shot. But you watch something like that and it's literally just Robby Müller being like, yeah, it's a little dark. Why don't we flip on our headlights? We got them. They're right here. Why don't we see how that looks? And then they probably both looked together and they were like, that's pretty good. And I love that stuff where you can just, and that again goes back to what you're saying about how like it's all instinctual. Like I feel like they just kind of get there and they're like, you know what would look really good? if we turned on this light. But so yeah, I mean, I think that is kind of, there's some of their strongest suits, and it doesn't feel like impossible setups. Like everything seems so like attainable, and you're like, oh yeah, I kind of can get an idea of how they did that, and I can see why they did that. And I always feel like, I don't know, that's so much more impressive than anything that like you look at a shot and be like, I'm completely baffled by how anybody could possibly have pulled that off. Like the answer is kind of right there in front of you. It's more about like how you got to the place where you're like, this is the best option to go with. Yeah, in terms of like particular shots, I mean, definitely, I don't know, the theme park peep show thing, just the whole design of that is mind-blowing. And apparently they built that like from scratch. Like I don't think that's a real thing that's ever existed anywhere.
No.
And just the way that's lit, I always think about like, there's in like the center of the hallway to get into each of the individual rooms, there's that cigarette machine with the green neon light emanating from it. I mean, again, I can't explain why that is so beautiful beyond just, it's beautiful. Like it just works. It's the framing of it just kind of just works, and it works for that scene. Yeah, it's consistent with like the mood of the film, and it's just a beautiful image. And each of those individual rooms, I kind of want to see. We only got to see 2 of them. I want to see all of the rooms.
Same. I'd love to have a little museum in there.
Yeah. And when he first walks in, and there's it's just like the bar that's not even open yet, and there's like a band kind of rehearsing, and you got a John Lurie cameo, and it's just like, what is this place? Like it's so exciting. Yeah, those would definitely be some of my favorite. I mean, it's so hard to just pick one image, but that's definitely like the one where it's like, oh, we've reached a new level here when he goes inside that mysterious building that he has no idea what he's walking into, and then he gets that. Yeah, that just excited me to no end.
Oh yeah. I mean, I think if I walk into a building where I'm like, I don't know what's going on here, but if I just see John Lurie posted up on the bar, I'd be like, all right,
I'm good. Yeah.
We're going in.
Even though you most certainly shouldn't.
No.
Yeah. No. I mean, we're talking about instincts. Those are bad instincts, Felicia.
I know. It's just, it's the thirst. But I mentioned that every time I watch this, I notice something different or something else sticks out to me. Just another quick shot that I loved was when they're on the road before they even get back to LA. It wasn't the diner that we were talking about. It's another place. And Travis finally eats, and they're kind of sitting outside on those little swivelly chairs. And I was like, where is this place? It's insane. Those chairs. I cannot stop staring at the chairs, and the way it's kind of lit from under. I love that.
Yeah. There's like a train going by, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And like, man, Wim Wenders and trains, what is up?
Who knows, man? I mean, I'm down for it.
Yeah, it's definitely like some sort of a kink, I'm sure. I really love trains.
I mean, who knows what's going on over there in Europe? But speaking of Wenders, they've worked together a lot. Yeah. And what they say when they talk about each other is that sometimes they didn't even really need to speak too much. They kind of just had the same vision. And you see that, those partnerships between directors and cinematographers, when they work, they really work. And he had some great relationships also with Jarmusch and Your Freakin', obviously, but Wenders, they got the best out of each other. And I know we're only talking about Paris, Texas, but how do you feel in terms of the films that you've seen that they've done together, how they kind of riff off each other?
Yeah, I think their relationship is, obviously very special. And I think that it's like, I mean, that's got to be the staple of like any like dream, like you always want to like collaborate well and have like, a partner. I mean, I can't imagine being as lucky as to find like, these two people were when they found each other. But yeah, there's a lot I haven't seen, but I did actually recently watch Kings of the Road.
Mm-hmm.
And I watched that pretty recently when I was like homesick, which is kind of the best way to watch it, when you're just like stretched out on the couch, like unable to really move, and just like, oh, let me just like lay in bed, let those images wash over me. And yeah, I mean, and you definitely like, obviously it's black and white, the colors aren't quite as like, vibrant as they are here for obvious reasons, but it really does have, it's just like, the angles, those wide vast shots, it's all there, like all the blueprints for like their later collaboration are all on display. And you really get the feeling, because it wasn't like the first movie that either of them have done, but it really feels like they kind of helped each other develop their own styles. And that was kind of the genesis of like both of their works. And like, obviously like Wim Wenders he has worked with other people, and so was Robby Müller, but in each direction they had, they kind of took a piece of that working relationship and took that with them, I think. And you have to remind me, that wasn't their first movie, was it? Had they done work before that?
Together?
Yeah, together.
No, they had done Summer in the City, which is the first they did together.
I haven't seen that. Have you?
No, that's why I pulled it up quickly to double check if it was the first or not. No, they did it quite a few before. They did 3 before they even got to Alice in the Cities.
Oh wow. Yeah. Alice in the Cities. Yeah, there's a lot that I still have to see. But to me, that was the first collaboration that I saw. And yeah, you really just get the fact that they were, I don't know, I guess their skills were pretty honed, but they really did just kind of complement each other in a big way.
It's funny that you mentioned Kings in the Road, because first time I saw that was the Lightbox years back, was putting on the Road trilogy. So this is when they used to do like packages they used to do at the beginning when they first opened like double bills a lot, and sometimes they would do triples. So I was young and I could sit through 3 movies in like a theater. So I did it. And Kings in the Road is the 3rd of the trilogy. By that time, you're getting tired, but I just remember it was late. And I don't think this spoils the film. I don't know if there's really spoilers in this, but the specific poop scene in that movie, has not left my brain since. It's been over a decade. I was like, sir, what?
That was new to me. I somehow didn't get that spoiled. So yeah, that was that was a good shocker when that happened.
Yeah. And then I immediately had to Google. I was like, this is real. Okay. Yeah. This actually happened. Yeah. So I always associate that movie with that, which is fine. It's still a great movie. I still highly recommend it, but it's just a side note. But yeah, their work together is just really magical, and just to see what they could do in both black and white and color, but him always having the ability to adapt to the director he's working on, because as he said, he's just shooting the story that they gave them. He is being given what he should be shooting, and that's what he does, because in his mind, I'm just doing my job and I'm leaving.
A journeyman type. Yeah.
Right. Which I love. I love that about him. It's just like a relaxed dude. Not that it's bad to take your job seriously. I mean, if you're good at it, why not? You've earned the right. But I'm more of a relaxed type person. I love relaxed people who are like, yeah, whatever.
Yeah, me too. And I don't think I don't know who comes to mind as like the opposite, like David Fincher, I guess. Like, I don't think David Fincher could have made a movie like this and it wouldn't have those feels that you get out of this. It would have been so controlled and so specific, and everything happens for a reason. And I love movies where you're just like, why did that just happen? Why did we just watch a man defecate like that? Surely that wasn't part of the plot. That didn't have to be in there, but there it is. And I feel like I know that character a little bit more now.
Oh yeah, we're in it. We're personal. Best friends now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I that's what I love about. Sometimes even with this, I'm sure there's shots that weren't planned, and they were like, "That looks kind of cool. Can we use it? Maybe we will. Maybe we won't. Let's shoot it." And it just makes for a gorgeous film. And this did win when it was in Cannes, the biggest award there that year. Müller talks about how right after that, when he would get interviewed by, either journalists or other cinematographers or people in the industry, they'd always ask, how did you get that shot with the mirror between Travis and Jane? And he'd be like, oh, we just shot it. I just figured out the lighting. And they would get so mad at him because they just thought that he was like gatekeeping information. And he's like, no, I just shot it.
Yeah, it was a real two-way mirror.
Yeah. So where we're naturally heading towards now is these scenes, third act here.
I'm ready for it.
I'm ready for it. I'm scared because it's an emotional time once you get up to it. And this movie is 2.5 hours. For me, it doesn't feel that long. No. But once you get to that, it's like, okay, you kind of hold your breath, and it's a long time to hold your breath because it is a long enough scene, because you're like, what's going to happen? And the way that that's shot is just so magical. And I remember even when I first saw it being like, how is this happening? And realizing it doesn't matter. Just watch it, So how do you feel about the scene? How do you feel about the look of it? If it matters, if we know the techniques, if they had done it, using tricks, would that matter?
I don't think so. I mean, I feel if anything, it might have taken me out of it if it really did feel like there was some sort of like trickery going on, because that's just kind of not the movie it is. And it would have really changed the tone if it did, like, they introduced some, like, wild, like, De Palma-esque, like, technique to, like, split diopter or something like that, to, like, you'd be like, oh, that's okay, we're going that direction now. But no, I think that, like, how they just, like, they didn't fake it. Like, it was, like, I knew that it was Robby Müller's idea to do the, I guess, one-way mirror. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, one-way mirror. And the fact they just, like, they didn't fake it, like, whether it was was it Nurse Bibby, the first nurse, her, or Natasha Kinski, like, they really couldn't see Harry Dean Stanton on the other side, and they just kind of, like, filmed it that way. And I know they had to pump, like, a ton of light in it to, like, really make that work and actually make it invisible on her side. I mean, it seems like it was so hard. You would imagine that being so hard to shoot, but, like, you wouldn't know it by looking at it. It just felt so effortless. And yeah, it's a huge scene. Like, it almost seems like it's, like, the greatest stunt that any movie's ever pulled off. Like, it's this, like, just this huge bombastic moment, but really it's just two people having a quiet conversation, and somehow that feels like it's all built up to, like, the biggest, most explosive, seem like it's like a Mission Impossible level, something like spectacle. And it's just kind of Sam Shepard taking over with his poetry. And it all comes together. And that's when, like, in that scene, like, it's so kind of hard to listen to, just because it is so emotional and feels so invasive that you're even there listening to it. Like, you're like, I shouldn't even be seeing this. This is between these two people. Why am I allowed to be here? And in addition to it just kind of being that emotional, it also really does pull the entire movie together. All that mystery that came before it, all that, like, why was this guy wandering the desert just aimlessly? Why all of these things? It all weirdly makes sense. It's the fucking greatest.
Yeah. As you said, like, you kind of feel like you shouldn't be there, and they're talking through their phones, and they're not looking at each other, even though
his back is turned.
Yeah, but when he turns his back, I was like, I'm going to lose it. I can't handle this. This is too much for me to handle. And it's also a masterclass in acting from both of them. The writing, the directing, cinematography, everything. It's like one of those few scenes in, like, history where you're like, every single thing worked perfectly.
Yeah.
What I also love about this is that one of the facts I read was, because they're shooting on film and they really didn't have that much money, and they were shooting chronologically. So this is towards the end of their shooting schedule, and they were running out of film. They're like, we got to get this, so you got to do it. Like, we don't have the money to buy more film. So whether the added pressure, helped them get there or not, but it just works so perfectly. And it's one of those things. I had this conversation with someone else where sometimes when you're looking at auteurs per se, and it's difficult to kind of pick out a shot that would represent them, I think that's a shot that I'm sure he would be so happy to be remembered by. And we could get into, how it was shot and lighting, but as you said, it doesn't really matter the way it was done. It just was, as we mentioned before, he was like, I'm going to use what's available to me, and we're just going to do it manually.
Totally. And I think you're right, it doesn't really matter, like, what techniques were used. I think the thing that really matters is that, and this is coming from somebody that suffers with, like, a low attention span, and, like, sometimes I do watch movies and, like, have an urge to, like, grab my phone. Can you imagine like grabbing your phone or looking at anything but the screen during that entire sequence? Like, you'd have to be like a psychopath, right?
I think so. It's sociopathic behavior.
Yeah.
Are you, the only time I would justify, I'm like, are you looking away to go grab, like, a tissue?
Yeah, sure.
Maybe, like, pause it,
but it's just one of those, like, I can't miss, like, a single, like, even if I, like, there's a chance I misheard, like, one of those lines of dialogue, like, I gotta rewind that. Like, I cannot miss a single thing. And I mean, and like you said, like, that's a testament both to, like, the performances, the way it's directed, the cinematography. It's all of those things just kind of coming together in this way. It's it's such a cliche to say, but it's pure cinema.
Yep. There is something I do want to track back before we get to the ending, just because when we're talking about the landscapes and how wide everything is shot and how vast everything kind of looks, this is not a newer film. Not everyone. I've been lucky enough to see it in the cinema once. Most of us are probably watching it over and over again at home. Obviously, everything is always going to be better in the cinema, but I think it still lends itself well to watching it at home because something about the visuals seems accessible, right? It never feels like you need to watch this in a cinema or you don't get everything, because he's making it so that you feel like you can identify with what you're watching. So I don't know how you feel about that, because I'm sure you obviously rewatched it at home unless you rented out a cinema just to rewatch it. Which I don't, but
I'm going to.
yeah.
I'm definitely going to be screening it in a theater soon. Yeah, no, it's funny. Like I definitely have watched it a few times, but I haven't. Watching it yesterday was actually the first time that I've seen it in. It's been like probably almost a decade, honestly. So no, I really did feel like I remembered all the beats, and there was no like enormous surprises, but just like, you know, the sequence of ways in which things happened, and just like, you know, the feelings that kind of washed over me. It kind of did feel like I was watching it for the first time in a lot of ways. And I mean, everything's better in a theater. Like there's no movie that isn't better in a theater, I don't think, unless you're just like, you know, whatever, like, you know, I hate watching some kind of like, you know, stupid on Netflix, I guess. Like some things are better to watch on like Netflix on your phone. I guess I can see that argument, but really anything that's like, you know, shot on film or anything that like comes from like a certain era, I think it's just a better experience because you're entrenched in darkness. You don't have that option to like look at your phone, unless you shouldn't. Otherwise, you're a terrible person if you do.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean that. So it definitely would benefit from watching in the theater, just because, you know, bigger, distraction free is always going to be better with a film like this. But yeah, I don't know, watching it at home and just being in like the comfort in like my safe place, and like, you know, surrounded by my things, and like, you know, having a little blanket and stuff really made it a great experience. So I think there's so many different ways to enjoy this film, and, you know, in the same way that you can watch it a bunch of times and notice something different, I feel like you can watch this film in different settings and have a different experience. Like it'd be interesting in like to watch it in like an outdoor setting.
Yeah,
that would be fascinating. I feel like that would be like a whole new experience doing it that way.
That would be interesting, actually.
As long as I had like a guarantee that like people were going to behave themselves, I think that would be awesome. Especially if you saw it like, you know, watched it like with like a desert landscape or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Like let's go to Arizona and screen it there.
Exactly.
But yeah, it's a, you know, again, watching at home, it does feel kind of cozy, despite the fact that it's depressing, but there's some coziness to it. Maybe because it's just very soothing to watch. Yeah,
well, there's also something like, it's interesting. Like, I was actually thinking about that. Like, it's a very sad movie, but I actually don't find it depressing. And I feel like there's a distinction between like sad and depressing. Like they're two different things, and the movie can be sad but also weirdly kind of joyful. And I think it's to me it's joyful just because it is just kind of like rimming with humanity. The movies that I find depressing are ones that just like everybody's miserable and everybody's just kind of like a shell or like a husk of a person. And I don't feel like this at all. Like these really feel like people that are just kind of bursting with life, and to me that is exciting. I don't know, maybe that's like a weird thing for me, but yeah, that was how I felt. Like it's a sad movie, but it's very exciting, and I never felt that it was depressing.
That's a great distinction. You know, this is sad, but it's not
a bummer, you know?
Yeah, it's not like a Dancer in the Dark.
Yeah.
Or
yeah, sure.
It doesn't make me want to die after.
Yes. Yeah. At no point did I contemplate suicide, and that's a plus.
That's always a plus. Before we get into the very last scene with the reunion between mother and son, I just want to quickly shout out, because I haven't even mentioned Dean Stockwell, whom I love, and he just has such a great face.
Oh, he's such a great face.
I just love watching him.
He's so good in this. And it's so kind of because he really built a career of like kind of playing weirdos. So it's kind of like disarming to see him just play like a nice regular guy. Yeah, one thing that actually jumps out about his performance to me is that he, and I know he's talked about this before. Robby Müller watched some of the commentary, and Robby Müller was talking about this. Like it was such a challenge for Dean Stockwell, especially in those early scenes, because, you know, the age-old saying like acting is reacting. So you kind of need to have somebody to like play against, and it's him delivering these lines, and Harry Dean Stanton's giving him nothing back because, you know, he's mute and he's not saying anything. And it was incredibly difficult to like, you know, keep going, even though you're just, you know, saying lines to like a blank canvas who is barely emoting at all. And it was a real challenge. But the fact that he actually was able to still pull off what he did and make that, he kind of made up for like the silence from Harry Dean Stanton by kind of being this lively. It's a very like kind of physical performance. And like, I don't know, something about that like jacket that he wears.
I was going to mention the jacket. I was like, I want this jacket. The outfits were
kind of like a members only jacket, I guess.
Yeah.
Like I don't know. It's just like a beige like dad jacket too. But that and his like baseball cap. Like I don't know. There's something so like cool and boring about it. I can't put my finger on it.
It's dad core.
Yeah, it's dadcore. That's perfect. Yeah. Turns out I can put my finger on it.
I won't dwell too long on them, but I just love their dynamic and they work so well together. And you really feel like they could be brothers. And I know obviously they're
Yeah.
actors, so that's their job. But some of the way that he delivers those lines to Travis in the early times before he starts speaking is like when you're annoyed at your sibling, where you're like, can you just, stop being like this? Yeah. So great performances. Also, Clément, she's great too. And Hunter. He's
Hunter
great
is
as well.
great. It's yeah, well that's hey, I didn't there's one thing I learned just from doing research before this. I did not know that he was a son of Karen Black.
I was just going to say that because I also
That's
didn't know.
crazy.
Had no idea. I was
Yeah.
like, what? That's absolutely insane. How is
Yeah.
this not information that's not talked about
I
all the
know. I
time?
don't know how it took me that long to realize that, but that's yeah, that's huge. And of course, his dad is the co-writer of
Hmm.
the film, and that's cool too. But Karen Black is his
Yeah.
mom, like that's crazy. But you're right though. He's so good. And like I feel a lot of like, especially like movies in the 80s, they really lean into the like precocious kid thing, and sometimes it can be like just insufferable. But he's really good. Yeah, I don't know. I think about that scene a lot of like them watching the vacation footage, that like 8mm vacation
I
footage.
know.
And then when he finally says as he goes to bed that night and he calls him dad for the first time, and it's like, oh.
I know. It's just so good. And for someone who hasn't acted before, it's
Yeah,
great to be able to pull that out of a performer,
yeah,
especially a kid performer. Shout out to all of them before we get
yeah.
into, well, I guess that ties into the last scene because Hunter has a great big part in this. So we're getting into now Travis brings Hunter to his mom for their reunion. And that's a big scene also, right? That's where the movie ends. And up until then, you have his adoptive parents who are very caring and understanding. Whether you're a parent or not, you can understand how it could be traumatizing to be like, well, I've raised this kid now for 4 years. Yes, you're the real parents, but I also don't know where you are. What's happening?
Mhm.
What's the deal? Is she going to want to keep you? Is this going to mess you up even more seeing her? And then she's just like, I can't. There's no more information after that, right? It just ends.
No.
It's kind of the perfect ending. Too
Yeah.
much information would have kind of killed it. So we were talking about how you're supposed to feel. Are you supposed to feel a certain way? I don't think you're supposed to feel anyway, but I guess how do you feel about that scene?
Yeah, I mean, too much information would have killed it. Absolutely. Like, I don't need a like title card that says like 8 years
Yeah.
later, like, like, oh look, they're a happy family, like, and they're all like, they still get to see Dean Stockwell in his life, and like, yay,
Mhm.
everything's okay. No, like, I don't need that. That would have been a horrendous ending. But so I like that it was kind of vague and open ended. I think what really makes it work is what Natasha Kinski does, like that her reaction, because you can tell that she walks in and she was kind of like nervous. She's obviously very
Mhm.
nervous, and you know that she's nervous because she's such a physical actress. Like the things that she does, like she places her hair and like she really uses that blonde hair as like it's such a it's such a crutch. Like it's fascinating how like the way she twirls her hair and stuff like that. But you can always know when she's feeling like nervous or shy or uncomfortable, and you could really sense that. And then as soon as she saw Hunter, you could see that just melt away, and just like the amount of joy. And it wasn't until she actually like, picks him up and just twirls him around that for me, I was like, oh, we're good. Kind of.
Yeah.
And obviously I don't know that. And like, there's no way of knowing
Mhm.
that, like, that's actually, how long that's going to last for, and like what 4 years later is going to look like. But in that moment, it felt so satisfying because I had absolutely no doubt that like this was good. And yeah, the decision from Travis to kind of just like drop the kid
Mhm.
and let them have each other without him being part of the picture
Yeah.
is interesting, because I'm sure people are like, well, why couldn't he have tried to actually make it work? And I think the answer to that is we all know it wasn't ever going to
Yeah.
work. Like, she's so much younger than him, and it was just like an infatuation. And like, I know that she kind of, especially Kinski, she wrote a lot of backstory for her character, just that it was never planned on being like filmed, but just because she wanted to kind of give an extra element to her character. And she kind of went into how, like, she immigrated from Europe and didn't know anybody when she arrived here, and that Travis gave her the most attention, and she mostly just loved the attention that he gave her, and that's why she fell in love with him, which is very sweet and very romantic. But it's not really realistic in terms of longevity. And I think he realized that it made more sense for him to be with his mom, because that relationship it wasn't. I'm sure it was real at one point, but it didn't seem like, and because he still exhibited a lot of the issues that you could tell, like, through his story, what broke up that, what caused, it to completely, his life, all their lives to fall apart. And you can still see that he still had those things. Like, he had the jealousy when he quizzed her on, like, do you take home men? Like, he's still asking her those questions. Like, he hasn't like gotten over that part. He's still drinking. Like, he took Hunter to the bar after. So, like, he's, there's absolutely, like, I feel like it went out of its way to show us that, like, oh, these things this behavior is going to repeat. And I think he realized that, and he made an executive decision that would be best for them. That's how I felt.
Which shows in that little spurt of time, like, character growth, because that's just growth for anyone to have the realization to be like, I'm not the best person for these people, whether I'm still in their lives to some capacity, that's different. But just being like, this won't work because I haven't fully changed yet. So I can't be your main person right now. So I love that ending, and it's sad, but it's also heartwarming. And as you said, when she picks him up, that's when I was able to finally breathe again and being like, even if we don't know what happens, but again, it doesn't really matter. That's Paris, Texas in the smallest nutshell. Really, it's a film that needs to be seen, and we can talk about it all day. But before I hand it off to the last section, is there any other points you'd like to bring up in terms of the visual aspects of the film?
Oh, great question. I mean, we already kind of went into the theme park peep show. That was the one I really wanted to make sure. Oh, I do want to talk a little bit about Natasha Kinski's pink sweater, like that iconic pink sweater that, I mean, this is just like, this is just trivia, but I thought it was so cool. I found out that like up until like the day of shooting, Wim Wenders was like, nothing's working. None of the wardrobe's quite working. And this again goes back to what you're saying, is like nothing was planned. It's just kind of that instinctual thing of like, what's going to work? We don't know, but when we see it, we'll know. And they're going through so many wardrobe changes, and it just like nothing was quite working. And then like the morning of shooting that scene, the costume designer found that pink sweater at a garage sale, which is just like, it's one of those, like, it's as serendipitous as like the movie. It's just like, it's so perfectly in line with that kind of just things just kind of happen and they work out. And of course, as soon as they saw that, they were like, oh my God, that's her sweater. Of course, that's her sweater. Like, how could it be anything but that?
Yeah. It's iconic. It's so another thing where sometimes you'll see on the internet like images where it's like the face is blocked out and you just see the silhouette, and you'll see like the pink sweater and the blonde hair, and you're like, yeah, I know what that is. I know what movie that is.
Yeah.
I don't need to see the rest of it. I know exactly what that is. And that's wild to be like, it could have been a day late, or they could have not come across the garage sale, and we would never have had that sweater. So it was meant to be.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, I'm glad we got to end on that.
Yeah, I don't know why I forgot to bring that up, so I'm glad that you did. That's why I have guests on. I don't do this by myself. So I'm going to get into the last couple of questions of the show in the end credits here. The first one is, if someone comes up to you and says, hey, Brendan, I am getting into looking at films from a cinematographer perspective. I hear about this Robby Müller guy. I've never seen any of his films. Where should I start? Which one do you think would give me the best version of him so I can move forward? Which film are you picking? Would it be this one? If so, why? If not, which one of his films would you pick?
Such a great question. And I do feel like, I'm biased since we've been talking about this movie. I'm getting so emotional thinking about it. But honestly, I do kind of think that it is Paris, Texas. And I think why is because it really just does highlight like everything that is amazing and magical about what he does and what he can do is kind of on full display here. And I can't imagine anybody liking Robby Müller, but not liking his work here. And vice versa, I can't imagine, like, I feel like if somebody were to watch Paris, Texas, and been like, yeah, I don't really like the look of this movie, I don't think I'd recommend anybody to
Yeah.
keep watching his movies. You know, it's like, if you don't like this, then like, I don't really see how you're gonna like Dancer in the Dark or like, you know, even like, I mean, even like Repo Man or something like that. Like, I would say like maybe Repo Man's a little bit more fun. I mean, it's a lot more fun. It's like one of the funnest movies ever. But but I mean, it's like, I feel like this really does like summarize kind of what it encapsulate what he does. And yeah, so I think this is kind of the best place to start. And if you like this, keep going. And if you don't like this, just move on. Maybe you just don't like movies.
Well, yeah, exactly that. I think for me, my answer is also Paris, Texas. I'm biased. As I said, this is my second favorite film of all time. I'm always going to push Paris, Texas. And as you said, like, if you don't like this film visually, if the visual part of this film is what bothers you, I cannot imagine how you would like anything else that he would do, or not to be harsh, how you would like film in general.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it does feel like, you know, I mean, like, and again, like, I love Repo Man. I love like To Live and Die in LA. Like, you know, but I do feel that like, and as beautiful as those films are, those really do feel like the work of the director. And I think with this one, although this is through and through a Wim Wenders film, it kind of feels like it's co-directed by Robby Müller.
Oh yeah, as much as he would disagree,
Sure, yeah.
I would say no. He definitely was a big part of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so both in agreement there. The second question is the double bill question, and I will say that most people don't give me just one double bill because it's dependent on the feel. Who's it for? Is it for me? What's the deal here? So if you have more than one, that's totally fine. But if you're creating a double bill, either for yourself or someone else, what film would you pair this with and why? It doesn't have to be a Wenders film. It can be. Okay. It doesn't even need to be. Some people just go completely off kilter and be like, this is my reason why I would want these two together. So.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it doesn't even have to be a Robby Müller double bill. No. Okay. It's hard because, like, man, how do you watch another movie after watching this?
Yeah.
You know? So I feel like it would need to be first, or else it would need to be something totally different. Like, I wouldn't want to like I wouldn't double bill this with like David Lynch's A Straight Story or something like that, because it's a little bit too, and it's kind of, you know, they're different movies, but it's kind of like retreading on like kind of the same wavelength a bit. So I would want something that would kind of go a totally different direction. Man, that is a tough question. I mean, the easy answer is to like, you know, take a break and then just go right into To Live and Die in LA, I think.
Yeah, that's a good one.
Yeah, just because like I feel like when the movie ended, like I'm like, okay, that was a very emotional experience, and I don't think I want to go through that again. But I don't want to leave that world necessarily.
That's true.
If going right into To Live and Die in LA, it's like you still get to like, you know, still get to live in like that world and the way that looks and feels, but it's just kind of like, you know, a lot more fun, a lot more easy to digest, and especially after that, it's a, you know, it's a nice dessert after a big hearty meal.
Yeah, exactly. That's a great pairing, and it's interesting, as you said. Do I start with something else and end with Paris, Texas? That's kind of the route I went. Movie I'll pair it with was first and then Paris, Texas. And when you said David Lynch's Straight Story, but I heard David Lynch first, I was like, oh no, I picked a Lynch movie. I hope he's not going to say the one
that's funny. I mean, not that it would be wrong if somebody went Straight Story, because, you know, those are two great movies, but I just feel like with double features, I prefer to not, to have something that really does kind of take a different tone, and it's it shifts gears a bit.
Yeah, so I went Wild at Heart for it because I think it's kind of also also a road movie. I would start off with the chaos and go into Paris, Texas. Again, there probably would need to be a break there, just to breathe there, to be like, okay, now I'm moving into another world that's less chaotic. It's emotionally, I guess, chaotic, but not, you know, as chaotic as Wild at Heart. It's hard to watch another film after you watch Paris, Texas. I didn't watch something after, and I watched it early enough where I could have watched something else, but I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna let this sit with me for the rest of the night. Yeah.
So you're going Wild at Heart first then?
Wild at Heart first.
I like that because, like you said, it's very chaotic, but it ends on such a, I don't know, it ends on a very, like, you know, light and kind of romantic, and that doesn't feel that unlike it. So it does feel like if this were like a mixtape, like the two songs would flow into each other very nicely. You know, it wouldn't be a jarring, a jarring transition.
No, you can go something like, if you're going to go contrast, you can do kind of like a Von Trier with this, because that would be like, I don't know, it'd take a long time to recover from all of that.
And there's definitely like similar themes there in terms of the like, you know, fatherhood and like, you know, am I actually ready to be a dad? And I guess in terms of Welded Heart, yes, he is. And in terms of Paris, Texas, no, he's not.
There you go. You know, the binaries. Yeah, those are interesting double bills and from interesting filmmakers and just vibes throughout. I think that's the theme of this episode. That's the theme of Müller in general. Vibes.
Yeah, what it's all about, right? Vibes.
That's how I'm trying to live my life.
I've joked about this before, but honestly, it's not really a joke. Everybody's just like, I don't care about plot. Like, I actually do not care about my plot in a movie. I just care about character and vibes. That's all I care about. That's all I want in a film. I feel like sometimes plot can just get in the way.
Yeah. I want to thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me about such an important film and to chat about Robby Müller and cinema. But yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Well, I can tell you right now, I had a terrible time and I will never come back.
Noted.
No, I'm lying. That was actually so much fun. And I did, like I said, I was kind of nervous talking about it because like it's easy to talk about a film that is just like fun and silly. And like, you know, I do it a lot when I'm on stage, but when it is a film that really does evoke like strong feelings, I was kind of nervous, but yeah, as soon as we got started, it was like, I don't know. It's weirdly an easy movie to talk about because it is kind of so simple, and it is just really, it's a personal experience for everybody. So it really, you're not talking about how like, you know, complicated the plot is or anything like that. You're just talking about like the things that it evokes. So yeah, I had fun. I had a lot of fun talking about it. And yeah, I love talking about film.
Yeah, so. I think it's one of those where I was also nervous, but I was like, you know what, I'm just going to gush about this movie. So
yeah.
Let's just have fun with it. So, yeah.
Totally. Well, it was delightful, and I really appreciate you having me on. And yeah, and congratulations on building this cool podcast. It's a ton of fun.
Seeing Faces in Movies is an official podcast of the Royal Film Club. It's hosted and edited by Felicia. Intro music by Lemon Rocker. If you like what you heard, let us know at seeingfacesinmovies.com or send us an email at seeingfacesinmovies@gmail.com. And while you're at it, please subscribe and rate the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. And stay tuned for our next episode of 24-Hour Party People.